I was fishing a bit on the BookFunnel thing because I do use BookFunnel, but I always think that I've set up a different giveaway than what I want. Do you want them to sign up for an email list or don't you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be averse to trying out an alternative to that, except I just paid for the $120 yearly subscription for BookFunnel. So I feel like I have to keep using it just to get my money's worth.
Yeah, you can use StoryOrigin for free now, so you can test it out and see if you like it. But yeah, no, I think BookFunnel is probably the thing that most people compare StoryOrigin to. But the feature sets are besides the reader magnets, I think reader magnets are just something that most authors end up talking about. And so people tend to compare StoryOrigin and BookFunnel a lot because that's one of the features that authors just talk about the most, even though we have fairly different feature sets beyond those that overlap. But the other thing is with like StoryOrigin, when you set up those landing pages, you have a specific page for your reader magnet. And then you've got a specific page for like your universal book link of that. And so StoryOrigin separates that. So you'll have the same book across multiple areas of your dashboard, and it's specific for, this is the version that's for your building your mailing list. This is the version that's for getting your sales. So it's very explicit what you're doing with that book on StoryOrigin.
This actually might be maybe this is the Patreon extra stuff. I'll check what I said right after I said I won't include this. I'll let you weigh in on that as well. But specific for reader magnets, I think one of the things that I'm finding now that I feel like I have all the pieces that I want to have in place now for my author business, but I'm not convinced that I'm doing it in the most efficient way. And so I have a reader magnet, and so it's hosted on BookFunnel. So in my social media posts, I'll put a link to BookFunnel to download the giveaway. And in my newsletter, I include a link to it on the theory that maybe people have forgotten that they have a right to get this. So it's in the footer of all my newsletters. But then I think, no, maybe I should be sending them to my website. So there's like the tool side of it, but then there's also the implementation side of it, just to continue our IT theme. Specific to reader magnets, do you have any advice on the best way for people the most effective and most efficient way for people to handle that?
So there's lots of things that you can do with reader magnets, and there's lots of advice about how you might use them effectively. So I'll just starting from the top of what should you even use as a reader magnet. I recommend using a prequel short story to your book or series as your reader magnet, a 10 to 20,000 word prequel. And the reason that I recommend that is, one, a prequel will help hook your readers into reading the follow-up book, so you can actually, hook them into your universe. The second thing is a prequel can explain the universe as well. Whereas if you're using like a side story to your book one, if you're expecting them to come in with background knowledge of your characters or something when they're reading that side story, then that wouldn't make a very good reader magnet for getting people who have never read your book one onto your mailing list. So you want that prequel to set up the world, but then you also want them to be hooked into reading the follow-up, versus a side story doesn't necessarily hook them into reading the tangential story necessarily. The other thing is I recommend it being a short story on the order of 10 to 20,000 words, because number one, you're going to be giving this away for free. So if it's short, it's cheaper to edit. The other important reasons are, though, is you want to keep your follow-up, you want to keep your read-through rate really high, right? If you write 100,000 word reader magnet, then there are going to be less people that make it through all 100,000 words, versus if it's 10 or 20,000 words, the read-through rate is going to be higher. So you can be more confident that they're actually going to make it to the end and then want to read the follow-up. And then I recommend it not being too short. Like, you don't want to give away just 5,000 words, because if someone joined your mailing list to get, let's say, like a 2,000 or 5,000 word short story, they might feel a little bit shortchanged, just because you can get lots of stories on the internet for free that don't necessarily come with signing up for a mailing list. You want them to feel like they got a good deal out of it. And so, yeah, that's what I would recommend using as your reader magnet. And then the other thing with it being a prequel is you can use that as a reader magnet either to get people to onto your list who have never read your books before, but you can also use it at the end of your book one in order to get people who might have bought book one through a retailer, and then to get them, the people who are super interested in your world and your story, to get them to sign up to your mailing list to then follow up with them about when you have book two or book three come out. Those are the different ways that you might use that a prequel that you couldn't use a side story or something. So in terms of how you actually end up driving traffic to that reader magnet, it's highly variable, and it depends on what your sort of goals are. If you're just starting out and you don't have a mailing list and you're just trying to build up a mailing list and get started and going on a regular cadence, I would recommend joining some group promotions on StoryOrigin. Those are really effective ways for building your mailing list. And you'll see authors who get 100 subscribers in their first week on StoryOrigin by joining a group promotion, or 200 or 300. Like it can get pretty high depending on how big the group promotion is that you're in, what genre it is, and how nice your book cover is, and your description and all that stuff. But people who come in to get a reader magnet who have never read any of your books before are going to be somewhat less valuable to you as an author than the person who's signing up to get that reader magnet at the back of book one, right? Because the person who has read book one and then gets the reader magnet, you already know that they must love your writing because they want to explore deeper into the universe, versus someone who's never read your book before and just wants to test you out as an author and do the free trial period to see whether or not they want to buy into your series. So it depends on what your goals are. If you want to keep like a super lean mailing list that's just super, that where you just only send updates about when you've got a new release, versus do you want to have a mailing list where you are keeping up a regular cadence with authors and recommending them new books and asking people to get your review copies, and you're using that mailing list to build your review team as well and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's going to be, I think, coming out just shortly before your episode, there's an episode with Lisa Vino about email newsletters. And I said in that episode that people can always tell what part of my author creative work or business I'm struggling with, because that's it's who's on the podcast. And the newsletter is something that I've always struggled with. Not on the nonfiction side. I have an email newsletter for the Indy Author, which is I find very easy to do, but I've always struggled with the fiction side. But I really like the idea of exactly what you're saying about the psychology of the people who get to the end of your first book. And I think a logistical thing that I can't remember if this was something that I talked about on air in another podcast episode, but that if people use something like a bit.ly link or
Mm-hmm.
a customized link like that at the end of their books, it's a good idea, because if I decide to move from BookFunnel to StoryOrigin,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to go through all my books and fix and change the link from BookFunnel to StoryOrigin. I'd rather have it be some customizable link so that I can behind the scenes say, oh, I'm just sending them to this new place now.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. StoryOrigin, I've got a blog post on there about building your mailing list and using reader magnets. And it's a Q&A format. And one of the things I talk about there is if I'm including a link to my book if I'm including a link at the end of my book, how do I want to do that? And I recommend using a service that allows you to link to whatever that passes that link through, using a bit.ly, or there are other sites that if you're using like WordPress for your website, you can add this plugin and then it will add bit.ly functionality to your website where you can create a route on your website that will just redirect them to wherever you want it to go afterwards. Because it might not even be about necessarily like changing the service provider for who you're using for hosting your book. It might be that, hey, I used to have this link go to my reader magnet that was like a prequel, but now I've written a side story. And so this side story reader magnet is really best at the end of book one. And I'll leave the prequel just for people who are like new to me. So you might want to just change out like which book you want it pointed at, or you might not want it going to a reader magnet. You might want it going to a review copy or a universal book link to increase like sales on the read through on that book. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there about making sure that you can arbitrarily change out the links at your back of your book without actually having to go and update your manuscript and republish it through all of the various platforms.
And I suppose then the terminology you would use is just, do you want to find out more about whoever? Yeah. You're not specifying what the giveaway is.
So I wouldn't, in that post where I talk about like, how should you do this in your back matter, I do recommend you do want to use some kind of vague wording there about where that link is going to go, and just say, hey, check out my book here, or check out the other interesting story that I wrote, or something like that. It wouldn't necessarily be that wording. You can figure out something better than what I just did there. But yeah, you can keep it vague, or you can keep it specific if you don't think that you're going to change it out for a long time. So
cool. That's a nice chunk of extra content we can offer to the Patreon folks.